Welcome to this very special edition of The Author's Voice with KAJ, a show where we explore the stories behind the stories. Here we dive into the worlds created by authors, discover their inspirations, and ensure that you walk away enriched and inspired. And today we have with us author Alan Muskett. He's the author of Burnout Ladder: How to Thrive in a Chaotic Workplace. He is a mindfulness and well-being specialist. He gave up his corporate career due to workout, and since then he has written the Burnout Ladder. So let's talk about the book itself. Let's dive into the story. Welcome to the show, Alan.
It's nice to be here, AJ. Thank you for having me on.
You are welcome. Welcome once again to the show, KAJ Masterclass, this time on the author's voice. Alan, we want to understand the book itself. Tell us a bit about your own journey towards writing. Normally, when people have a difficult time in anything that they do, book is the last thing on their mind. And here we talk about burnout, and then you write a book on burnout. That itself can be very daunting. Help us understand your journey towards becoming an author.
Of course. Yeah, well, I guess I've always wanted to be an author. I've always been interested in creative writing, and I do a lot of journaling and diaries and all that kind of thing. And I've tried on a number of occasions to put something together and never quite managed it. So I guess this came about really from a burning passion, which was mental well-being. So my brief background is I spent 30 years in a corporate career in the food manufacture industry, and I did various roles within the supply chain and some sales. And supply chain particularly can be very stressful when we're not getting our deliveries in to customers on time. They don't like it, and it's a very stressful environment in operations. So it happened to me about 10 years ago. I had a burnout issue. I just got a job that I'd really wanted, and it was an important leadership role. And I put too much pressure on myself, wanting to be so good at it, that I just ended up working too hard. And then with that comes all kind of things like you second guess yourself a lot. You lose the confidence in making decisions. I started to sleep very badly, which is how it all started, really, by having poor sleep. Anyway, that all went on for about 6 months to a year. I'm over it now. I left the food business, not directly because of that, but because it was time to do something else. So I got into mental health, which is, I know, what we discussed last time on the show here. And I just decided, with everything that I was learning, because I retrained, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but I retrained into how the brain works, how we can look after ourselves with mental well-being, and just picked up a lot of tools that I thought I could share with someone else. And the whole idea of the Burnout Ladder book, if you don't mind me going into that directly, AJ, please stop me if I'm going on too far. But the whole idea behind the Burnout Ladder, which is the book that I published last year, is burnout happens in stages, and it's like climbing the rungs of a ladder. So the early rungs of the ladder, the early stages, are very difficult to see because it's quite an exciting part of the journey that you're on. Whenever you do something new and you step up, there's an inner kind of sense of, excitement at being up for the challenge. And so what happens is we get into that, we get almost seduced into that. And then as we get into the middle stages of burnout, we realize, this is quite a lot to keep up, and I'm not sure I can do that. So that's what happens to a lot of us. And the book really is intended to prevent burnout. It's intended to diagnose, if you like, where you are on this ladder and what you can do about it. So if you went to rung number 4, which happens to be something called a cynicism stage, when we start to be cynical and resentful about our jobs and about life in general, there are a number of tools there against that particular ladder that might help you, and that would help you come down the ladder or off it altogether.
Absolutely. So tell us a bit more about what have you got in the book, and who is this book for?
Well, this book is for anybody. It's as I said, it's really for people who think they might have a a work problem, or I should say a work-life problem or work-life balance problem, in that they think, well, they're losing a little bit of control and they might be worried about they're going to burn out. So the book itself is really an explanation of why I think we get into burnout. So it's not just the obvious that a company places too much pressure on an employee. It is not just that life is just too busy and stressful. It's the way we react to that stress, and it's the way we are with our human characteristics. So little things like, our hunter-gatherer ancestry has given us this psychology of, I need to be people-pleasing because I want to feel like a useful member of the tribe. Okay, and that makes us do things that we wouldn't necessarily do for ourselves. So we tend to lose a little bit of ourselves in the process. The book, the first few chapters are about that, about the causes of burnout. What is burnout anyway? Which I should probably just say right now. Burnout is, as defined by the WHO, it's defined as 3 real characteristics. And one is emotional exhaustion. The second one is a sense of cynicism about your job. And the third is a lack of professional efficacy, which I didn't like, actually, because I thought that indicates to me that the sufferer of burnout is the company that you're working for, not you, the person. So, and I've gone more into this with research and with talking to people. It's your whole life that's affected. So when, to answer that first part of that question, who is it for? It's not just for people who might be struggling with work, but who might have an overall work-life balance problem and might have, somebody might be a carer, a full-time carer, and they might be burning out as well. So generally the symptoms that we find are pretty much the same.
Absolutely. So why if I understand, you believe burnout is a choice that rather than an inevitability. In today's time, is how much choice do we have in our workplaces, Alan? And how have you dealt this part in the book? How we can make it a choice rather than something that we can get forced into if we are joining the wrong sort of a workplace?
It is a really good question, and it's also quite, I know, controversial to say that, because I know that some people work in appalling environments where, and you think you don't have any choice because you have to get money to feed your family, So I have to be a little bit careful about what I say about that, because there are certain situations in life that you just cannot control, to be realistic and pragmatic about it. So you need a job to feed yourself and your family and keep a roof over your head. That's fine, but and the circumstances might be quite painful around that. But it's how we react to it that is the most important thing. So it's not so much the stress, it's how we react to the stress. And that's what really most of the tools in the book are about. So there's a little bit about how we protect ourselves, how we're making sure we're doing other things in life that are nourishing us rather than depleting us. There is quite a bit about mindfulness. No surprise, really, as I'm a mindfulness teacher, specialist, and passionate advocate, which is all about managing our negative emotions and how we react to those emotions. And then there's also things about how we can control what we do. We do spend an awful lot of time worrying about what we can't control, which saps our energy. And if we stick to the things that, are within our remit, if you like, within the thing, there's something I can do today. I can't do anything about the company strategy, for example, but I can play my part within it, and I can just do what I can control. All of these things take away negative feelings, negative energy, negative aspects, which I think is what swamps us and actually gets us on that road to burnout.
Absolutely. So, Alan, the title says "How to Thrive in a Chaotic Workplace." The Burnout Ladder: How to Thrive in a. Why are workplaces chaotic today? Why do you? How have you looked that part in the book? Have you done that?
Have I? What do you mean?
Have you discussed this part about the workplaces being chaotic in today's time. Earlier, also workplaces were there. I don't know how chaotic were they, but in today's time, who is making these workplaces chaotic? Is it individuals because they have so much to achieve, or either they have so much of they have to bring food on their table, so they agree to jobs that they do not like, or is it the corporate who deliberately tries to create an environment to get out as much as possible, and give as little as possible, so that their wage bill is in control, and they can keep on shuffling employees in and out, and that creates an artificial pressure on the employees.
Well, you've done my job for me there, AJ. You've answered that question perfectly. So I think a lot of it is, I think workplaces are more chaotic, aren't they? Because we are constantly trying to do more with less. And with the advent of technology and AI particularly, I think so the pressures will become even more now. So, why do you need a person when you can get a robot? That really is with everybody now. It used to be in car factories, didn't it? We would use robots back in the 70s, and now we effectively have robots everywhere. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part is, as you said, it's the business owners, which, if you think about it, used to be more people that you knew, people that you would see, and then people you'd work with for years. And now, of course, most of those smaller companies have been swallowed up by larger companies, and we're dealing with shareholders that we never see, and with the best will in the world. And they may well want a company to have well-being initiatives in place, but at the end of the day, what they really want is their dividend and their share price to go up. So I think we're just becoming ever more squeezed. And we've always said that. If we'd had this conversation 20 years ago, it would still have been a chaotic workplace, but it's just getting harder and harder. And I think now that we have less and less security than we ever had, people don't stay with companies for 20, 30 years anymore. Most people I would deal with in the work I do have been with a company for probably between, none and 3 years. So that in itself brings its own stress, that lack of security, that lack of familiarity. So yeah, there's a number of reasons, AJ, as you pointed out so well too.
So ultimately, it's the individual's responsibility. No one else is going to care for them or save them. It is you yourself have to take care of your bread and butter, as well as your mental health and the burnout part, not to get burnout on whichever corporate ladder you put your legs on.
I think that's a sad reality. And of course, the company has a responsibility to put certain aspects into place, the way they look after people, the way they can motivate an employee, look after them. Of course they do. And a lot of it, by the way, I think is about good management rather than putting in a well-being course, So a good manager can make sure an employee is looked after mentally, almost just through their coaching methods, rather than having to say, okay, well, we're putting on this stress management class for everybody. It doesn't have to be like that. But I think a lot of pressure is on managers because of the enormous stress that comes down from leadership and stakeholders, and also the pressure coming up from the managing the people that work for them, because as we just said, there's so much more turnover now in businesses that in itself brings stress to managers. And I just think a lot of managers are ill-equipped for it. I just don't think we train people properly. And so they're going to find themselves in difficulty. Hence, you need something like this.
Absolutely. So, Alan, what was the most challenging part of writing this particular book of yours?
The most challenging part was the end, the last, few yards, if you like. I really enjoyed writing it because I didn't start out with the intent of writing a book. I just started writing it, and I thought I can put some information together, maybe blogs or something like that. And then as I developed it, I just thought, oh well, I'm getting quite a few words together. This could be a book, and I thought this was a really good way to communicate with more people in the world. So a lot of what I do is work through companies to get to employees. Now I'm at the behest of someone who's a budget owner and will make a decision, yes or no, whether I can speak to their employees. Okay. And I just thought, well, I would rather get to the employees directly, cut out the middleman, so to speak. So the hardest part was the editing process, because I just found that I was just writing and writing and writing, and just letting it flow, not letting writer's block get on top of me at all. Just keep going, knowing that I could always go back and change something. And as it turned out, it's quite easy in a way, because with the ladder, it had a certain structure to it. So I thought, well, I've just explained what is burnout, why do we get burnout, and here's the ladder. That's it. It's simple. Then that would inform the process, so to speak. But the hardest bit was when it came back from the editor, the copy editor. I had an awful lot of work to do, because I realized that I'd sent the manuscript off a little bit too rough. And if I had my time again, I would make sure it was a little bit more polished to save their time and my time. And there were a few simple things I could have done better if only this hadn't been my first book. It's always easier second time around. And the irony is I nearly burnt out while I was editing and getting the book ready for typesetting. So I was working from 3 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night for a couple of weeks or so. And I really felt exhausted at the end of that. So that was the hardest bit.
Absolutely. Authors also need to take care of their health, or they also have that fear thing of burnout. Not only the corporate employees, you can just induce yourself into that. So I want to understand from you. You talked about this book, so it was your first book. Maybe second book, you will be much more of a smooth journey. Is there any second book in the pipeline? Anything else that you want people to know about?
Yeah, there's two things really I'm working on. One is a follow-up to this, really. Of course, you've got to do a follow-up, haven't you? So it's more about how you put the good habits into place that prevent this anyway. So a little bit more about the awareness that we might have, because, as we do know that we're mostly run by our subconscious habits, and we kind of sleepwalk through life, just getting up in the morning and doing this, that, and the other without being consciously aware of it. So I'd like to write something about that, and also, which will be a non-fiction book. And then the other one I'm tinkering around with at the moment is a fictional piece of work around the same topic. And simply because, there are a lot of books on burnout out there. As I've I go into Amazon, there are a lot of books on burnout out there, and of course, a lot of them will be just the same. Mine isn't, of course. It's very different because it's got its own different structure. But I would like to do something a bit more fictional, which is how people learn, isn't it? By storytelling. So rather than just be, I tell my story in this, of course, but it's not the same as just, as we did when we were kids, listen to fairy tales and fables and stories. That's how we learn those morals of those stories. So I'm working on a fictional piece as well around mindfulness, which might be slightly sci-fi-esque, a slightly alternate view of the world than we've got now.
Absolutely. So coming to the book itself, in a nutshell, what insights, key message that you want your readers of the book to take away with them?
The key thing is that you're not alone, and you might go through some periods of panic when you're on the journey to burnout and think, oh my God, my life is out of control. And what's more, I'm probably the only person suffering this because everybody else seems to be doing okay. Well, everybody I've coached on burnout as a result of this have all said the same thing to me, that the most important thing they did was open up a conversation with somebody else and said, look, I'm struggling here. I need some help. And actually, the person on the other side of that conversation has said the same thing. I'm struggling too. So the message is, don't panic, because you're not alone. It's very easy to get sucked onto this ladder, but it's also easier than you might think to get off it again. So don't panic. There's help out there. Okay. And if it's not reading a book, it is talking to other people.
Absolutely. There is help out there. There is so much to learn from you about all this, Alan, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, take your help. what's the best way for them to do so?
Well, if you buy the book, of course, you'll have all my contact details in the back. You can get me on www.theburnoutladder.com, which would take you to my website, and there's some tools in there, some information in there, but also the best way to get hold of me and book a call with me. You can book a free call just to have an initial chat. The other thing I do is in the book, on page 67, I think it is, of the paperback, there is a QR code which takes you to the website where there's an assessment, a questionnaire, 60 questions, takes you 10 minutes, and I will give you basically a free report, a 3-page report in where I think you are, without me even knowing you, of course, but based on the answers to your questions, I'll give you a little insight into where you are. So I recommend that as your way into.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The Author's Voice with KJ. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, AJ. It's been a real pleasure.